Welcome to Stage Dive, a podcast where we go deep on the art of live performance to help artists perform better on stage. I am your host, Jack Dawkins. I am a rapper, poet, and storyteller out of Boulder, Colorado. I have a few quick announcements for all of you listeners out there. I have new music that is releasing all the time. I have a few shows coming up, and I also have what I call the Contemplation Collective. It is a guided visualization that I host most Fridays, unless I'm traveling or some other things have come up. But it's a really wonderful space that we create. It is intended for anyone who wants to join. It is completely free, and it's really just an opportunity for you to take 15 to 20 minutes, unplug from life for a second, and just get connected to your breathing and to hopefully go on a little bit of a journey that makes you feel calm, peaceful, and centered. If you want to learn about more of any of those things, you can go to www.jackdawkinsraps.com/linktree, LINKTREE. My guest today is Chris Cardillo. He works at Dice, which is a new ticketing platform designed to get more people to more shows. But before that, he wore many hats, including that of a performing artist as well as a venue manager, which means his perspective on live performance is particularly fascinating. We talk about a Goldilocks performance, which is when all the elements feel just right. We talk about the differences between the music scene in Los Angeles and New York City. And we talk about what it looks like for artists to cultivate their local music scene. We went on many tangents, but I think that only speaks to the joy present in the conversation. And so without further ado, my conversation with Chris. Chris, it's lovely to have you here. And my first question for you is, what was the most surprising part of 2022 for you?
Wow.
We'll start with something small, like encapsulating a whole year in one question, and we'll take it from there. It'll be great.
I would say the most shocking part of 2022 for me, looking back very recently, it's super topical, is how many shows I made it out to, even being the father of a young child. So yeah, that was something that our team at my company did. We kind of looked back and said, hey, can we do 22 for 2022? I actually had to whittle it down, so that felt good. Based on working father schedule, as you know, it was great to know that I did still make it out.
Yeah, 100%. Where you don't have to pick one, but is there a particular show that stands out as a highlight, or one that you just really enjoyed?
Wow, yeah. I would say a special one for me was to be back in New Orleans. Was really great this year, just for a quick handful of days, and I got to see the War on Drugs play. Just that's such a special city, just baseline. So yeah, being able to see a couple of my Philly friends just completely destroying, what they were set to do. It was really wonderful. Yeah, very special experience. Production quality, above and beyond as you'd expect from a band like the War on Drugs. So yeah, that was pretty a nice highlight.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Do you have a connection to New Orleans specifically, or I also love the city, but I have no real relationship to it?
Yeah, no serious clout connection. I would say it's all just like a strict admiration, just for what that place is. Yeah.
Yeah. And I love that you mentioned the quality of the production, because to me that means when you're watching a show, you're capturing a lot of the different elements that you're seeing. So if you had to break it down, when you go to a show, what are those different components? Production is one, but then what are the other kind of elements that you're absorbing as you take it in?
Oh man, the first that I think is oftentimes pretty unquantifiable would be just. And we might quickly, where we're 1 minute in here, we might quickly steer toward hippy dippy territory, but ultimately, what is the energy of the room? How does it feel? What is, is there too much recycled, air condition coming through, or heat, or, how manufactured is this setting? So I think that's one, just kind of feeling how the energy in the room is. Do people feel excited about what's about to happen? Do they feel obviously a collective feeling is pretty rare to pick up on, but I've found, I tried to tally this up the other day. I guess I've been to probably over 2,000, whatever you want to call them, concerts, shows, performances of some sort in my lifetime. I hope it would be more. I think that's kind of my low end of the spectrum estimate. But ultimately, yeah, I think like you're talking about what makes this experience special. And production's a big one, with whether that means sound, lighting, right? There could be a multitude of components there, but those are usually the big ones. But yeah, ultimately, um, how that performer shows up on stage, or that group of performers, and is it electric? Is it really mellow? Is it somber? Is it exciting? Right. So I just love, and I've been able to see some acts, play several dates of a tour. And I feel like from night to night, it can change dramatically based on that space, right? And who's there and who's not, and all those things. So yeah, I don't think I succinctly answered anything there, but yeah, production is almost like as a blanket term when it comes to, my personal thoughts on it, it's like community can be, right? It's like, how deep can you go with it?
Yeah, absolutely. And for what it's worth, like being succinct is not a requirement or any sort of quality that's required for this podcast. So you can be as verbose as you like. It's cool. The way you explain that, what I'm hearing is like, so there's the experience of your five senses, light, temperature, kind of like, again, and whether you call it production, but just that. Then there's an energetic piece, right? Of just like, what is the vibe in the room? What is the vibe of the performer? Are they matched? Are people meshing? Is there that feeling of community or communal experience existing? And then I imagine there's also inevitably connection to the performer. Like, you can be in so many different places in terms of like, this is my favorite band of all time. I've been following them forever. I know all of their stories, etc. Or I
forgot the second line of the second verse. And yeah, right.
They changed a word and like no one else knows. Be like, I fucking know. Or like you're seeing an opener, like never heard of, right. No context for, inevitably stepping into someone else's environment in a way because the vibe is set for the headliner, not for the opener. All the, like that whole different melting pot. So now I have two questions. The first is like, do you have like a Goldilocks setting for a show? As in like, if you got to like turn all the knobs, it's this size, it's this vibe, like, and whether that is actually a show you've been to or is like, that was it. Or again, if you're just kind of like crafting from memory, what are those elements for you?
Yeah, I think crowd size certainly plays a big part of that. Also, I'd have to do a little side note and ask you a question after this too. Yeah, so remind me about opening acts. Yeah, wow. That I mean, we could get really fun here and just creative and exploratory, but yeah, ultimately that sweet spot, as I would call it, would land somewhere, in a range of like not too few people where you don't feel like, there's enough movement and energy in that room, in that space. Because I've been to so many, basement shows, house performances with very beautiful arrangements and just one person performing, and it's just so captivating. But yeah, ultimately, I would say a size of around, a capacity of a venue where I always feel comfortable is around like 175 to like 250. I know that's ridiculous and specific, but I think right around there is where, the performer might like step up to a certain level just because there are that many people in the room.
Yep.
And then, yeah, I would say in terms of lighting and sound and all that, yeah, it all plays into it. I tend to be more like, I like my mids. I don't like things too high end, too trebly. Ultimately the sound component's really important. And ironically enough, I don't know really how to mix records or live sound. That I very less than rudimentary understanding of that. I can do that for like a singer-songwriter performance at best. So I deeply appreciate when someone's behind the board. They're not just doing their job because it sounds great and they're doing it, like people who were next level dialed in, and you can see them working the whole performance or the whole show. So again, still not answering your question, but yeah, it would be a space that's not just a black box room, I would say. So I usually don't think outside performances yield the best auditory sound, auditory elements, but in some really unique spaces, maybe that would be a really cool thing. I've seen performances all over the place. I think one that I saw really recently, not at all actually, pre-pandemic, was Patrick Watson performed at the Houdini House in LA, the Houdini Estate rather. And so this was like an outdoor performance, but it's Los Angeles, so it's not cold. It's just just a bit chilly. It was like a secret, industry performance thing. So it was like special lights set up. The production was on, and he just controls his own mixer, like on stage.
Oh, wow.
He's a nut. He's amazing. So at any rate, I think a performance like that is probably something that I could say is like in a sweet spot where there's like just enough people to make it feel like, the performance really stepping up and putting on a show, but not too many where it gets lost and you're hearing people talking about their really boring jobs behind you or whatever, right?
Yeah. There's like the element that to me feels most familiar is I think there's something really special about, and like it doesn't have to be petty, but the feeling of like I'm getting to experience something that a lot of people aren't. And at some point that means the crowd can only be so big, because if you're in a stadium, like I saw Kendrick Lamar in a stadium, it was fucking amazing. I was under no delusion of like, this is so special for me. It was like, no.
He's singing to me. Yeah. Kendrick is looking right. Yeah.
No. But like when you go to those smaller shows and again, big enough so that the performer can get the adrenaline rush, like can feel the response from a crowd, but small enough where you're like, there's someone who isn't here that I know that would have loved to be here. And I can't wait to tell them about this, not from a braggadocious standpoint, but just to be like, awesome shit is happening. And I thought of you and it was amazing. And like, that's all human connection goodness, right? Like
absolutely.
That's the shit.
Worth mentioning, at the same time, I feel like that we're hitting like a thread here, but performances, I've played a few myself because I'm not by any means like a professional touring artist or even recording, like a studio musician who I've always worked and had full-time work in my life that wasn't performance. But I'm going to kind of touch on a place called the Lost Church in San Francisco. No electronic miking of anything. Wow. Again, you can probably fit 50 people in there. So again, maybe undercutting a bit of what we're just talking about. It's like, it has maybe a great special thing has to be like over a certain number of people, but also again, like performing there was, way scarier than performing like plugged in electric with a band, like in front of 500 or 1,000. Right. So I think ultimately, it really, right, it depends, but yeah, there is something really special about hearing people creak in their chair and like during your chorus or something, right? It's like, oh my gosh, again. So those things are really special too, and I'm really grateful that again, coming out of lockdown period of where we're all at, being able to be in rooms with folks that rooms that small with such small audience crowd sizes. So I think it's right, that unexplainable magic thing, which is why you have a podcast about it, which is why, even when the world seems like it's so dark and, looming and gloomy, like we still got to do this stuff. People are still in their basements making music and performing and recording and releasing. So yeah, ultimately, you'd ask what a highlight or a surprise of 22 would be. I hope that 23, the surprise will be by the end of the year that like, there is some form of collective, holy shit, this doesn't feel as off anymore. This like, as I don't know if you've been experiencing this. Have you like you saw Kendrick recently, obviously, like other performances. What I've been speaking about with some of my closest friends is like, the music can be still great this year, like coming out of the worst of hopefully where we've been. And some of those albums that are coming out are incredible. The singles are popping. Like music is still great, but there has been collectively, maybe other people don't feel this way, but collectively with my friends, I felt a kinship to them about like things kind of feel dulled. Yeah. And I don't know, that's because we're still kind of in that whiplash effect of what went down and all this stuff. But ultimately, I'm really looking forward for this year to be way more explosive and kind of like amped up and kind of like people, not playing it so cool. That's another whole thing about, right? Yeah.
Yep. I'm going to hit you with like a scatter shot of responses to some of the things you just said. The thing you're speaking about returning to normalcy, I completely understand. And for me, I have two answers. One is like, I still see events get canceled more now, and we don't always get transparency as to why that is happening. Cause it could be that someone got COVID. It could be they didn't sell enough tickets, but just like, I don't remember that being a thing. And literally within the last 2 or 3 months, like I've had 4 or 5 events just kicked down the road for 6 months. And like, here, it's on a new date. And it was like, that wasn't you couldn't just do that. You couldn't just be like, oh, oops, like this show is now 5 months later. Hope that's not a problem. Um,
Yeah. It's a
and
totally new landscape.
and in some ways it's good, right? Because if people are sick, they shouldn't be performing. Like, I think we've all heard the war stories of like, I was on tour and my lung was fucking collapsed and I had a gangrenous leg, but I still got out there. It's like, I applaud the bravery, but also like, I don't want you or any artist or performer or anyone to have to like suffer through that to get to that point. But also as a fan, as a purchaser of a ticket, to feel so interchangeable is like, well, we have your money, and so we'll do this whenever we feel like it, and you can make it work or not. Like,
Sure.
one of the big things I think about a lot is the notion of hospitality in these experiences, because sometimes it's present and sometimes it sure ain't. And this is one of those ways where it really feels like there's just not a lot of love in the process of like, hey, this is 5 months later now, fucking deal with it.
Yeah, right. It's become totally normalized. And yeah, I think, clearly with most things in human existence and life, you can look at it from maybe two main angles and then like, thousands of other ways. But ultimately, yeah, it appears as though, in the industry of even, well, let's just stick to live touring. It's just easier, right? So in the live touring industry, it's pretty apparent that folks just like can't afford this right now. Sometimes, like we don't have to name drop. We don't have to like pick, on things. It's just the reality.
It's tough, yeah.
And so, right, and so yeah, on two sides of the coin are like, yes, one, like I want the artists who I like obsess over and love, and like will always fund their tour as best I can by T-shirts or always tickets, right, and things like that, records if you can buy them.
Right.
But yeah, ultimately, it's like they now, as touring artists, as a collective, have this decision like, is my sanity and mental health going to be affected by completing the rest of this tour? And you just nailed it. I was like, it's been like so many things have been canceled more willy nilly now. It's like, and not saying that not a lot of thought and decision has gone into those choices, but ultimately it's way more widely acceptable. I mean, people would be in uproar a couple of years ago,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think the whole go back to normalcy or this new normal, right? We've been hearing that God for so long, but ultimately it's like, it's just the new shit. Is it the new shit? And I'd say like having a collective response to not being able to do certain things, you're kind of like, well, maybe I'm not going to play with the gangrene leg or whatever, right? And we even saw like a slightly new approach to it with the NFL game, last week. So I think there are definitely changes that are happening, and I think right now we're still in that whiplash period of time, but hopefully these things do shift.
Yes.
But yeah, talking about one arm of the music industry, the live touring portion, and not talking about the streaming and all that, right? There's some fallacy there too, because it's all kind of connected.
Yes.
Not kind of, it's all intrinsically connected. So yeah. Wait, let's not get too far. I want to ask you about the opening act.
Yeah.
So, and we'll get back to your rhythm, I promise. But no, I'll totally forget it if I don't ask. So, that feeling of showing up at a concert or a show, wherever you're at, and you're like, all right, well, maybe you saw the name of the opening act or the performer, or maybe you just got there because I just want to go see this show and I know the headliner, or you just go to a show sometimes we don't know any of it. Mm-hmm. So I would say, like, again, to kind of pose it back at you, was there a time where you showed up for something, maybe you'd heard the name, maybe you heard one song, maybe you didn't hear any, but you were just so utterly captivated and or blown away by that opening act that like now you will like put them on your shelf? Like, has that happened for you?
So yeah, and I've mentioned this before on the podcast. I went to see Wale almost a year ago. I want to say it was like February. It was fucking cold. I remember that. And there was a local artist, Trace is his name, who I had heard about and had seen and was excited to go see, and I knew he was on the opening roster. And then Guap Dad 4000. And when I saw that, I was like, is that a fucking DJ? Is that a like, I don't know.
Can you say that? Name it one more time.
Yeah, Guap, Guap, Dad 4000. And I was
I thought you
like,
said guac, like guacamole, guac dad.
I mean, to some extent, it could have been that, and I would have had the same reaction of like, I don't fucking know.
Yeah.
But but you're there, and his energy was great. His crowd work was particularly amazing. He seemed really happy to be there. He told good stories. And I think he still did that in the context of understanding it was his job to warm up the room. Like, he was definitely taking his moment, getting his flowers, but he was there to support another artist. And not only did that not bother him, he seemed to be excited to have the opportunity to celebrate and lift up his fellow artists. And so like the whole reality of it, I was just like, fucking amazing. And yeah, now he's on some playlists, and I've listened to him. And if anyone asks, like, he is absolutely my go-to of like, I'm so glad I saw him. Because again, it was a name I didn't recognize on the bill. And he walked into a room that, like, I'm sure some people knew him, but it was definitely not like a hometown crowd feeling. Like, he had to win them over, and he did, to his great credit. So like, that was mine for 2022. And I'm very much hoping there will be more of that. Or like, if I get to be that for someone this year, right? Like, I'm now in the space where I'm opening and learning about like the really fascinating psychosocial emotional reality of like, you're going up to perform and no one knows you.
Yeah.
Nobody knows who you are.
Yes. Yeah.
And obviously you can react to that in some different emotional ways, but if you are willing to be playful with that, it's like, great. So no one knows who I am. They have no context for why the fuck I'm here or what I'm going to do for the next 20 minutes. And it's, you can either take that as like a challenge of like, well, then fuck you, I'm going to perform my heart out and I'm going to make sure everyone in this room loves me, like, which is one energy. The one I've been leaning more into is like, it's so fucking play around. Like, so I don't have to do a straight lace set. I don't have to do things the quote unquote normal way or in a way oriented to what I want to do. I can understand that my role right now is to make everyone in here have a great fucking time so that they're more excited about the next person who gets up. What set is that? What energy am I bringing to make that happen? This is so fucking silly. I was like opener, first one on stage for a show back in like November, I want to say. And a big bill. I want to say there was like 10 artists.
Now you guitar, singing?
I'm rapping.
The setup.
So just me,
full on backing tracks?
Me and my laptop.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Totally. So even more, like the reason I was like even more naked.
Oh yeah. No, like there's no dance. There's no fucking
I'm up
instrument.
There solo, I bought like the biggest fucking acoustic guitar I could find. Like, this is my buddy. Hide behind this thing.
Yeah.
All right on.
Oh my God. But yeah. But so I'm going through my set, and halfway through, I like, to make a long story short, I tell the crowd I hate traditional crowd work, because if I just ask you to scream, or if I just ask you to cheer, or I just keep asking you for energy, you will get tired and sick of me, which is not what I want. So instead, like, let's do something fun. And so I got the entire crowd to quack. And we went back to Mighty Ducks, and we went quack, quack,
Sick.
Quack. And everyone was like, at first, like, what are you doing? And then inevitably, like, your childhood wonder comes in. You're like, well, yeah, I will fucking quack. Thank you very much. And like, it lasted all of a minute.
My right to quack.
Is your goddamn right to quack. And like, and it was fun. It was irreverent. It was silly. It broke some tension in the room. Like, I noticed some people paying more attention because they're like, what the fuck is this guy doing? Appropriately so. But again,
maybe a couple notes for next quacking session. Like, hand out a couple hockey sticks. Second thing, maybe like record the quacks, kind of like loop that shit back, later in the set. Be like, so you're part of this now. Mm-hmm. I'm totally bullshitting, but yeah, that's ridiculous and fun.
But all those are options, right? And I think that's what's fun. Is like when you actually allow your mind to be open to like, I have 20 minutes and I can fill it in so many different ways. And I've said this before, and I say it lovingly. It makes me crazy when artists get up and the whole set is like, this song just came out. Song. This song is not yet out. Song. This song will come out later. Song. It's like, give me anything else other than the song and when I can or can't hear it. Like, you're a human. You're a whole fucking artist. Why did you write this song? Why do you do this? Like, why are you on stage right now? Give me more of that. Like, I want to get to know you.
Yeah, I
Um,
think there's probably a lot enveloped in that as well, like oh my gosh, just the performative, the token, banter between song banter that's just so commonplace. But yeah, I think ultimately, you know, oh my God, here's the empath in me coming out. But no, ultimately, I'd say like people with horrible anxiety who just for some reason feel like no matter what they need to be up and performing in front of people. And oh, but listen, dude, I'm a shithead. I feel the same way. I'll be like, oh my God, yeah, just cookie cutter, and you're saying the same stuff. Um, so yeah, it's like right. This is your chance to kind of like bring your own twist on things or just bring your own flavor to it. And I think ultimately, yeah, I almost err on the side sometimes of just not saying shit between songs
yeah,
and let people fill in the gaps. You know what I mean? Again, it depends what role is being played. Is this an opening slot? Am I
yes,
supporting a stranger or a friend? Like how
right.
amped up do I want this crowd to be, or mellow, or right? Like you don't want to overperform and try too hard, right? It does kind of I guess depend on that situation.
Yeah, yeah. It's way more of a conversation than I think a lot of people realize. And the crowd is one voice in the conversation. You, the artist, are a voice in the conversation. The context of the room is a voice in that conversation. What's coming after you is a voice in that conversation. And again, it's not about all like aligning and agreeing on one thing, but you have to be in conversation. And so, like, if the crowd is not feeling what you're doing, change what you're doing. Like, or
Yeah.
if you're in a room, or like this is another example. Are you familiar with So Far?
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
right. So like I'm hopefully going to get to do my first show with them in a couple of weeks, and I've seen their setup. It's like a 1 amp PA system and a mic and a group of people like sitting on the floor in a honey shop. Awesome that you're able to perform in that way. I'm not bringing my fucking headbanging trap music. Not going to do it because that's not what that audience needs or wants. That's not comfortable to listen to when you're sitting cross-legged. But like some spoken word stuff, some more mellow stuff, some acoustic guitar driven stuff. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, I can build a set that's
Classic read the room, right? It's
big
literal
time.
little room. It's probably someone's fucking right, like the a honey shop, or right, like yeah, I think ultimately it is all about reading the room, whether you're, I think like here's a nice segue or something, right? So you and I probably both had jobs, but we've also both performed, like many people who are into this thing we call like music and or entertainment or theater or whatever it is.
Yes.
So yeah, ultimately, I think reading the room is, for me, is translated into every faction of life existence, right? Are you around a table with your family at like a holiday dinner, and you're like, that probably this topic or this joke probably won't land. Just be yourself and just read the room. But like if you're trying to, get to the next level in a professional setting, or blah blah blah, then like read the room. Maybe like don't. I'm not saying like, oh, it's beneficial to not just be, your sincere self, but ultimately like, maybe like give them a different version of don't give them an 11 of yourself, give them like a 7, but not a
Yes.
different type or version, just like a different like loudness
Yes.
or
Yes.
something, right? So read the room. And I think ultimately the people who are the most captivating on stage are those who have kind of like some different turns they can take you
Yes.
on. Going back to banter, because this is, I feel like, still kind of this conversation, this like in between song thing and or approach to which songs to choose to play. I remember so I grew up in, the suburbs of Philadelphia, just over the river in the South Jersey area,
The
from
Schuylkill.
Philly. Not the Schuylkill, the Delaware River, and then the Schuylkill River. You know about the Schuylkill. You know, I don't know that you know that. I'm just pretending like you're a Philly dude. Yeah. Schuylkill Punch.
Yeah.
Yeah, we won't do any more of my Philly accent, but ultimately, in the scene I grew up in, it was very much like a punk hardcore scene. Going to shows was pretty much kind of a, what you're getting into. There's probably not a lot of like, this song is, like a deep story about things. Sometimes there is, but ultimately, as years went on, and I started letting in a lot more different artists and sounds and genres into my world. And there was an artist named Pedro the Lion, David Bazan. Goes by Pedro the Lion, and he was a bit more like kind of the emo indie side of things, let's say. at any rate, great storyteller. If you're not familiar with his songs and tunes, I give that a shot.
Awesome.
But at any rate, I'll never forget. It was the first time that I had seen him perform, and the first time I had ever heard a performer do this. It was probably three-quarters of the way through the set. And instead of saying, the song's about, my dog who ran away, or, whatever, funny thing he's going to go on, he kind of just stops. He kind of like puts the guitar down and looks out into the audience and says, does anyone have any comments or questions or concerns that they want to talk about? Right. And so like in that era, I'm talking like early 2000s. For me, it was just brand new. I was like, wow, that was pretty neat. And since I've seen him probably 20 times or so he does this pretty much. He's been doing this for decades now. But ultimately, I've seen other artists do the same. I don't know if they picked it up from him or if this more of this collective idea of like, okay, this is maybe just something that would be more interesting than talking at people about your new EP that you can buy in the, whatever. Very, very cool though. I've always hung on to that as like, oh yeah, shake it up a little bit, turn the mirror around, and that was pretty fun.
Yeah. Well, and don't be afraid to break the fourth wall, right? Like you're there for connection. And I think that's true on both sides. The audience wants to connect with the artist because that feels meaningful. And as an artist, you of course want to see your music and your personhood connecting to the people in that room. And so it's like, it's one of those things that's painfully obvious, but doesn't seem so in the moment, that like you can just ask for conversation. Like you can invite people into that space instead of constantly feeling like you as performer have to fill every moment and every breath and every second of your time on stage.
Totally.
You don't.
Little side story on that as well. So yeah, that would often at Pedro line shows spark some form of political statement or some goofy shit about this, maybe some potty humor, maybe this or that, like a joke or whatever. Great. Another performer who would do the same thing is this guy, same genre-esque, this guy, Mike Kinsella, who plays on the name Owen. Again, this is like dating myself. I'm very much pigeonholing myself into like what I grew up playing and listening to. But at any rate, there was a show he played in Philadelphia at a place called the First Unitarian Church. And it's a church basement where they have like a daycare and after school programs and, very multi-purpose. But when you're asking about what's kind of the perfect setting, so for like punk rock music or heavy music of any kind, I would say like the church basement has been my singular personal, like that's where my mind goes. I got to play there at some point in my like late 20s. That was like that mile marker for me. But at any rate, this guy Mike Kinsella is playing, and two knuckleheads are bickering in the crowd about something. So I guess someone was talking probably during one of his very sappy, sad, quiet pin drop songs, and so these two are going at it. And he goes, "All right, you and you, up on stage." So this is kind of getting back to the quack, the quack story, and I'm like, "Oh shit, what's going to happen here?" And so these two guys get out on stage. Mike grabs the mic and he's just like, all right, you and you each get one punch in the gut. Go for it. You go first. Boom. Guy socks him. The other guy, boom, sock. Did you get it out of your system? Now go back and let me play my fucking show. It was great. It was just like commanding, funny. And this guy, again, just a very sad, sappy songwriter. It's great. The music's beautiful. But yeah, ultimately, it's just so, it's like, what a dichotomy there, literal, physical.
That's awesome.
Punches on stage. Yeah, just a classic wacko live experience.
And I hadn't thought of it this way, but it's true, right? Like, speaking of getting a little hippy dippy or woo woo, like, if you believe in this idea that energy cannot be created or destroyed, can only be moved. So often what people do is try to quash the argument, right? Like, hey, settle down, blah, 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 blah. And like, even if they don't talk, those two guys are going to fucking stand there fuming, which means there's like a 3-foot like circumference around them of like pissed mist that no one wants to be in. You're just like, no. But by inviting them up and being, all right, cool. You have energy, you have charge, fucking move it. Hit this person, hit that person. Now shut the fuck up, right? Like, just give the energy a chance to move.
Did you say pissedness?
Pissed mist, which I'm definitely borrowing from a stand-up special where I am also dating myself. But the context from that was they were talking about when you're in a car having an argument and the air just gets thicker and thicker, and you're just like, you could fucking taste it. And like, I've never forgotten, like, it's such a brilliant term for like energetic tension. So like, to whomever I borrowed that from, thank you. I appreciate you.
Running with that one. I had to like think back to it. Wait, what did I just hear? Did I hear pissed miss? Which would be funny, like a little, Christmas pun,
joke,
but also like pissed mist that's a fucking great punk band name. PISTMIST. You know what I mean?
100%.
Like, yeah. Throw a couple X's up there. I'm good. Let's go. I see. This is what I'm doing with my time in 23. We're gonna start a punk band called
naming neo-punk bands. Okay, I'm so glad you said that, because it reminds me of one thing before I want to pivot a little bit. Another thing that I've observed lately that goes back to your comment about returning to some normalcy in 2023. I played a show last Friday. I'm still fucked up on time. I don't know what
doesn't exist.
Like, it doesn't exist.
Not a thing.
But I was at this.
How did we even know when to have this call? How did we even fucking?
My calendar said it was yesterday, and I was like, of course it did. It's fine. Like, we'll connect at some point. But so it was like an open mic contest. So there were 15 artists, and it was a pretty small room, but again, probably like a little smaller than you said before, but maybe 75 to 100 people in the room. And what I thought was so interesting is like, particularly in hip hop, and this isn't universally true, but there is a more melodic, emotional, kind of arc going right now. It's definitely coming down, but like, Lil Durk, Lil Baby have been huge into that. And so that's what a lot of people are still making. And like, you could tell in the room, it's like, it's not that they didn't support the artist. It's that like, it's Friday night. I just finished my work week. I'm out to see a show. I've had a couple drinks. Like, I want to lose my fucking mind right now. And I cannot do it to your song about why life is hard and why this sucks. And it doesn't mean the music is bad or that the artist is performing poorly. It was just the energy, I think, or the space people are in is they need to move their energy. They need to let go. They need to move a little bit. And I got lucky. I so happened to have picked a set list that was intended to be higher energy. And I don't know if anyone heard a fucking word I said. I think they were just so happy that, like, again, musically or energetically, they had permission to just move, to just like be a little crazy or a little reckless.
Let it rip.
Just let it rip, right? And so I think something that I'm interested to see, that again, like when you go to see a performance at an arena, it's awesome. But again, there's so much distance between you and performer. It's a cool experience, but it's not the experience of like really being in the crowd and feeling the surge. I think more shows are going to be tuning into that energy, and hopefully in a way that is not violent or problematic. But I think people do just want to let loose. Like, they just want to feel a freedom of sorts when they go to see a show.
Yeah, I have two-parter follow-up on that. So the one would be, there is something about, going to see a certain type of artist or music or show. If you know you're specifically going to see, like I went and saw Sequel Rose play at the King's Theater of Brooklyn last year. I knew exactly why the fuck I was going there. I wasn't going there to move my body. Actually, at the time I had a leg injury and I was on crutches, so I really wasn't going to move my body. I sat my ass down in a wooden seat. But this place is, it was the first time I had ever been to the Kings. It's just historic. It's special, but it's large. It's a large, theater. At any rate, I was going to Sequel Rose to like just feel nostalgic, hear the new stuff, just let this wave, like just constant waves of like this beauty kind of just wash over, just like everyone else there at the time. But I think when when you're in a setting where people are showing up for to shake some shit off from the week. Hardworking people want to shake their shit off, right? Like it's just natural. You don't necessarily, if you've had a really tough time physically, mentally during the week, some people don't want to go and just chill out and think more about it. People like just get rid of it. But the thing I would say there is, I think some of the most captivating recorded music, but also live performance music is music that maybe the lyrics aren't, I want to party, have a great time, life is fucking awesome, everything, but the energy can be that.
Yes.
And maybe the lyrical content or the words or the approach is a little bit more real, or not that being happy is not real. You know what I'm getting at?
Totally.
Not corny and not forced. Just like, I love like kind of fast, loud, hard, like aggressive music. Upbeat for sure. It's like in certain keys and registers, you're like, all right, yeah, it's fucking great. But like, it's about like how fucked up everything is and wanting to like change things for the better, or like just complaining about something, right? So ultimately I think that's a beautiful marriage of things in music too, where it's like I just personally, this is like a weird little anecdote, but I just love that when like you go to see something or listen to something, it's like, wait, what are they singing about? Like, this is pretty fucking dark, actually. So I love that marriage of like, it doesn't all have to be 100% downtrodden, but also doesn't have to be like, tonight's going to be a good night or whatever. Right. Like it can be, you can like hit that, but then they're both great for what they do. And I'm not like knocking any music that's just like strictly party, have fun. But yeah. Also takes me back to another performance. When you caught me off guard kind of with that, like what was the best show, whatever, your most memorable of the last year, even having gone through all of that and whittling it down to 22, putting them in order, which I did all this shit, and I didn't even come prepared. There's this artist named Dijon who, again, if you haven't heard that, pop him on his latest record. It's just phenomenal. Like, I could get into all the little quirky details of it, but essentially, just the sonic experience. You're not just like waiting to the next track. You're hearing like all these crazy things. Like, is this happening in my house? What is that screeching? That someone's cell phone ding just went off, or like that. It's fucking special. I actually know one of the guys who played on it, just from my time in LA. So that got me even more hyped when I saw that his name was attached. And at any rate, the tour of said album happened obviously after all the shit that we've all been through, and it was this past year. And I went to the venue to see Dijon play, and I don't know what I was expecting, but I went solo, like I do pretty much all shows I go to now. And someone's got to watch the baby, right? We take turns. But at any rate, I walk in, and I think he had already started his first song, which I usually try to get there before. But you're walking in. I'm in there. It's a dark room, and then like maybe by the end of the third song, maybe some of the house lights kind of come up from the stage, and like I'm like, yo, I'm the oldest motherfucker in here by like 10 years, at least. At least, and it was great. It was just so fun to just be a bystander, just like still into it and like singing along just like everyone else. But ultimately, there's this one track from this album that was probably my most listened to song the year prior. And so he launches into this song, and I thought maybe I was the only one who like thought that this song was like the shit. And it was the first time since shows went away that I felt like, just like my cells just like spinning around inside of my body, and like, holy shit, I felt that special feeling again, which I hadn't felt in a very long time at a live show. So anyway, just a nice little, moment of like, all right, we're going to slowly kind of come back to that like explosion. So fucking cool. So special. Everyone's saying every word. It's just, the song's called The Dress. And this guy's kind of on like, he's certainly could be categorized as a hip hop artist and performs it, just doing some quirky, weird, unique things in that realm, and bringing a lot of live instruments into the mix as well. So The Dress by Dijon, unmissable track. Gotta put it on. Amazing. It'll change. It's a mood changer. I probably listen to it like every single day on the subway since moving to New York. It's incredible.
That's awesome. That's so good.
Yeah.
That's so good. I'm not going to let us go down this rabbit hole, but there's like, cause there's a whole other category of, right, like the artist, the room, the song, right? Where like that is a whole other constellation where everything fucking aligns and like those magic moments. But if we have time, we can circle back. But Dijon, The Dress, heard, love it.
Another note, I don't know if I guess I can share it. It's like ultimately like this, I caught wind of like, oh, he wasn't like, he was sick. The performer was sick, pretty Like
Pretty
he
sick.
really stretches his voice though,
Yeah.
like kind of how I do it. It's like you kind of forget you're supposed to do the diaphragm thing or whatever. He just had like a sore throat as well, but he on this record, like he goes to pretty much the peaks of where you can take your vocal cords, and there's beers involved, and so it's great. It's great. But at any rate, you know, apparently he wasn't thrilled with the performance. Just like as a classic thing, you're just like
What?
people were like lifted off the ground with you. And no, he mentioned it on stage. I'm kind of like, I'm sick, lost my voice. We're gonna do the best we can, and it was just like another time that happened. It was the first time I ever saw Fleet Foxes perform in Philly. Another sweet spot venue. Johnny Brenda's, right sides, right zone. Sounds perfect. Lights are great. Staff is awesome. The whole vibe encapsulated. So, at any rate, I'm really psyched to see this band for the first time. I've been listening to this EP. Oh my god, this band's so cool. Robin Pecknell gets on stage. He's like, I have the flu, so apologies ahead of time, kind of thing. And then, okay, 1, 2, 3. Oh, you're just like, what, dude? Look at the fucking. If that's you on the flu, I'm done. Like I'm gonna get a job. It was awesome.
Stage health is real. I don't care what anyone says. Like stage health is very much a real thing.
Mm-hmm.
So let me change gears a little bit. So you spent a good amount of time in LA. You're now in Brooklyn, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious, like, what was your perception of the differences between the music scene in LA and the music scene in Brooklyn?
I have this conversation frequently.
I can imagine.
So let's just start this whole thing up by saying I'm a Jersey boy. I spent a lot of time in Philly. Probably 14 years, kind of from 18 on until I was about 30. Then I spent some time in California. And then this is the first time ever living in New York. I still have that fucking Philly chip on my shoulder, man. It's never going to go away. It's the best. It's there. It just reminds you to be humble, be real,
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I bounced back and forth a bit. I literally was having this conversation, with my partner right before hopping in here with you. We were talking about kind of New York. She's heading to LA to see some friends and do some work. And then I sent her a ticket on Dice for a show. Right. So at any rate, the scenes are different in many ways, but I would say like Manhattan / Brooklyn / New York in general is very, it's vast. It's a bit overwhelming. What I find here, as someone who's a very small local artist, musician, band person, I'm not picking up on a ton of that, like, nurtured local scene or something here in Brooklyn. It's like people are already fighting so hard to be in New York that I feel as though it's just like a whole different world up here. Yeah. Whereas Philadelphia, Los Angeles, Chicago, there are certainly places in the country where it just feels like there is more of a vibrant, healthy, more local scene. The other thing I was talking about, it's like New York, you can find something to do no matter what. Like right now, I could go and probably go get ready to walk into a show and then go to like 40 more. Whereas in places like LA, even San Francisco, the Bay Area, or here, places where I've actually spent some time, it's a little bit dialed in for you.
Yep.
But don't count Philly out. I would say like it's definitely, my blueprint for how a music scene can be. Obviously relies a bit heavily on the rock and roll and stuff like that. Rock and roll is not, I don't know why I said that. It's not a real thing. Rock and punk and things like that. But then ultimately there is a great hip hop scene in Philly. There's a great dance scene in Philly, right? There's a lot happening. Where you're at, I know there's like a variance of live music to see and feel. But yeah, ultimately to compare them, I mean, LA is great because it's got this like, everyone wants to be a star thing. And that's real. It's so real. Even in the small kind of, singer-songwriter folk pocket that I was a part of, when I was running Gold Diggers, I was hosting a monthly show there where I pick a year, and then have a bunch of different artists perform just one or two songs from that year. So do like 1980 or 79, right? And so there was just like a scene that already existed there of like singer-songwriter, folkies, like who are just ready to play at any moment. And so that to me, it was just like, oh my God, I'm like the new guy in town, and I'm able to put together this show of like dude, it was like incredible peak performers each time, and some were really like pop leaning, and some were, you know, a little bit more like raspy punk, or that, like it was kind of
Mm.
like a beautiful thing. So LA is really special once you can kind of like get in and just settle in a little pocket of LA. I was always kind of like the east side of Los Angeles proper, and then, you know, anyway, yeah, I could do this. I could speak about for like 5 hours probably with you. I'm sure we could, and you can tell me all about Colorado and kind of like the different, you know, scenes that are happening and coming up. I think like ultimately they each have their own flair, their own thing. It's sad to see like kind of some things happening in places like San Francisco where, you know, people have just had to flee. Like the
Yeah.
dive bars are struggling. That part of that ecosystem, at least for me, that's kind of the scene that I'm comfortable with, the
Yeah.
scene that I know. And so, you know, when that's not vibrant, you find that like a lot of the other stuff just also feels very dull.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's, oh my God, this is like stereotypical cliche 101, but it's ultimately reality.
No, for sure. I think so. I spent 9 years in Chicago, and I actually think that's something really amazing about that city. And it's funny, it's like it's not that there's not money in Chicago. There's plenty of money in Chicago, but it still carries that blue collar attitude and ethic. And so there are tons of dive bars and small venues and I mean, like the number of places you can get a $2 beer in Chicago at 4 a.m. is very telling. I'm not saying that's the healthiest habit to be in, but I'm acknowledging that its existence and its availability speaks to the type of experience, either as a performer or as someone absorbing performance, you can have, which when I was there, I don't think I totally realized is it's unique. Like New York is late, but it's different. New York late is very, very different than Chicago late.
Oh, 110%. Yeah, Chicago's fucking great. Chicago's
It's a
great.
cool town.
Again, another multi-dimensional kaleidoscope city of sounds and music. It's like New Orleans is the same way. You know, talk about a resilient fucking place. But yeah, I love, you know, that's the other thing, hyper regional situations, right? Like I don't want to lose that as a country. I think like I don't know if that will happen, you know, but ultimately it's great that like I only really want to eat a fucking po' boy when I'm in New Orleans. You know, I don't really want to have one when I'm like hanging out in the middle of the country. You know what I mean? It's like
Totally.
I love that kind of thing. Like, you know, you can only get that here. So like music can be that way too, and I think that makes it way more special when you can't just like before the just pop it on my phone on the fucking thing. Oh yeah, they put it. This song is kind of cool. It's like when you hear something, you know, a band or a performer or whatever in its element. You know, that's a special discovery thing all of its own. That's a special thing. It's like I think to bring that stuff out is great for exposure, great for artists who are really wanting to like climb up and make it happen and be on top of the world. But yeah, ultimately, hyper regional experiences and moments are just, you know, unparalleled because like
no question,
it lives there, and your memory of it you can take, but it's going to live there. That's really special.
I mean, I think that's one of the really interesting things happening with hip hop in Colorado right now. Like the traditional stories and narratives of hip hop don't fit Colorado. I'm not saying that people haven't had a tough time here. There isn't or crime or poverty or any of those things. I'm just trying to acknowledge like well, there's two things. One, Denver's been growing a ridiculous amount, which means that the number of people who are here who are not from here and have no emotional relationship to the city that is older than 5 years is astronomically high. So if you want to talk about what it was like living here 10, 15, 20 years ago, nobody knows. No one can connect to that story because they didn't live it with you. They weren't here.
Totally.
And, you know, the other thing about Colorado is like, it's such an experiential city. Like there's a huge electronic and bass music scene here because there's the visuals and the lights and it's the whole room and it's the whole crowd. And like, that is the vibe, the experience of this city. And so I think where hip hop is, we'll see what happens, but something I'm in the active inquiry of as an artist is like, what can we borrow from that? You know, how do we honor and acknowledge that energy of this city and do shows here that wouldn't make sense in New York, that wouldn't make sense in LA, because this is just, it's a different crowd. We're in a different airspace, literally. I think that, and what's fun is like the way you were discussing regionality, and I don't mean to pigeonhole you, is like a little bit of the good old days, right? Like when you only could get these things in New Orleans or Colorado or New York or
Dude,
wherever.
I'm a kid, man. I'm allowed to be like, oh, I'm fucking before this smartphone, because
Oh my God. I had the thought today, like, kids will not know what it's
no,
like to have the
no,
fucking AM radio on in the kitchen on a morning when it's snowing, waiting to hear if there's a 2 hour delay or a snow day. And like,
shit was fucking rad.
it
Yeah,
was so
totally.
good. It was
That
so,
exuberance when
oh,
that number got called.
oh,
That's wow, dude. I haven't thought about that in many moons.
right? Right?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I'm gonna bring that up to somebody
So
next
anyway,
time it
we're
snows.
we're
Yeah,
old, as we've established. We're both
yeah.
fucking old, which is great. Um, but so you mentioned
Which is great.
which is great, super awesome.
Great to be
Um,
old.
it's awesome in that like we're here and we're having this conversation, and that means we did something with our lives that put us in this moment to be having this conversation. Which, you know what, I'm not mad about. I'm very happy to be here having this
There's
conversation.
no, there's no piss mist happening between these screens. Yeah, we're good.
Correct. I'd love to ask you to put on a slightly different hat, which is, so you organize these showcases. I would love for you to actually expound on exactly what Dice does, but I know that you are very much in the universe of creating, hosting, ticketing for live events. And I think something that artists can often be frustrated by is feeling like we don't always understand what the venue or the organizer or the promoter really needs or wants. So like, I get the joke that we all need to sell tickets. I think everyone can universally understand like people need to be there to both give the venue money and buy alcohol. I can do the basic economics there. But what are some other either intangibles or even tangibles of artists you've worked with where it's like, God, it was just so fucking nice to work with that person. And they just made things so
Mm.
easy.
I mean, we can. I'd love to dig into this a bit too with you, but yeah, I think ultimately it's just humility and
Mm.
knowing your value. I think it's like a sad but true thing in this world of like talent buyers and agents versus promoters and all that stuff that's out there. But yeah, ultimately, I think it just comes to probably as an artist, if you are at that level where you do have some form of management involved or an agent booking your tours, I think like hopefully aligning with them as
Mm.
morally as possible or just as people is probably helpful. I don't know that everyone gets to do that. I think oftentimes it's it's not like that much of a choice. It's like, oh shit, well, I'm an artist. I recorded this record. I want to put it out. I'm on a label. I get to do this. Like at this point, like there's an agency that's willing to fucking represent me. Like let's go. And on the
Anybody.
other side, of that, it's like established folks or folks who are just naturally like very popular or can sell a bunch of tickets, can probably have their pick of the litter on like, all right, well, they'll work with their management on like, oh, I actually heard some gnarly things about this agency. Let's try the other one. But ultimately, they're all kind of doing the same role. I think it's like just like in any arena realm of life, teachers at schools or doctors or whatever, fucking ever. There's always going to be gnarly people, and so to find the people who not only are like maybe less gnarly than the gnarly ones, but like that jive with you. It's like that's this whole thing. That's this whole dance we do as humans until we're gone. It's this kind of like maybe at this point in my life, this circle of people are serving me and I'm serving them. That's great, but then ultimately, like you kind of keep swirling around and people hop on and jump off and get in each other's orbits. As a really sidewinder of where we were going to answer your question. Yeah, I think ultimately just follow your gut on it, I guess. Like it's like a pretty lame way to answer your question, but I think ultimately you're gonna know something's off pretty quickly. And I
Mm.
would say like don't allow someone who you don't really trust or like you don't think is aligned with your values to manage you and represent you, because I think that can be tough too. Um, but ultimately, when I was doing the venue, when I had that hat on, I had a few hats on during that time as well. But ultimately, yeah, like running the venue, it's a whole different experience than now coming to the side of ticketing, and where the company that I'm at, I think I do believe firmly in the work we're doing. It's selling tickets still. I have a sales role. I'm very aware of what I do and what the company does, but ultimately, it's just such an antiquated model and just so fractured and stark. It's just so dark that I do believe that what we're doing at Dice is it's way more intentional. It's way more from the heart, and it's certainly fan first. So and we do have an artist development team who work really closely with the artists and helping them route tours, and we have like some incredible data that we're able to share. Like all that kind of stuff happens, but yeah, ultimately when it comes down to it, I'm just supremely grateful to be able to work within the music industry in a lane that I never considered prior to running a small venue where Dice was our partner. So it was an easy boat to jump into because I was like, well, I saw how they took care of me and the artists, and the fees, are nowhere near even our other competitors in the independently owned venue route, but like ticketing industry route, but like certainly not the Live Nations and the AGs of the world who have to operate on a whole different level. That's a whole other conversation we could do a separate episode about, is kind of just the reality that the Kendrick Lamars of the world attract so many more people, and they're marketed to so many more people, that in order to, in my opinion, handle that amount of people in one space, it's typically not going to be like a super lean, cutting edge, nimble, morally aware, smaller company handling those things, right? It's these huge conglomerates that ultimately are tasked with those Taylor Swift's, Blink-182s of the world. And I think that's kind of just inevitable. I've been like this jaded fucking punk mentality, like, and I still am. But ultimately, at this point, like as I'm now working in different realms of the music industry, I can see like there is a certain level though of like, if you want that many people in one place, it's kind of a necessity. It's going to feel pretty, pretty like
Yeah. I think, it's easy for me to draw comparisons to the restaurant industry because I was in it for nearly a decade, but like Open Table was Ticketmaster. There was one place you could go. It's where everything lived. You were completely at their whim of pricing and service and et cetera. And like, you just fucking dealt with it. And that was it.
Yep.
And then
now you got Resi, you got a couple extras, but
you got a ton. And like, as with all things, there was an enormous expansion and then almost immediately a like 50% contraction because we realized we didn't need 19 reservation services, but 5, where some can do no reservation, but will manage a walk-up line, or, this one can also do to-go orders. Talk has their whole thing with ticketed meal experiences, which I think is great. And you realize, like, to your point, and this is, I hadn't heard it expressed, but I'm glad you did. Like, there can be utility in a Goliath when you have to manage the security and the logistics of an arena. Like, yeah, you're just gonna need bodies. Like, you just need so much power, whether that's people, whether that's technology or security, etc. Like, sometimes you just need a big hunk of mass and steel to do that. And I
couldn't agree more.
Like, you don't need it for $22 tickets with $14 in fees. Like, that's stupid. No one needs that. No one wants that.
We can move beyond that collectively, and that's what, we're not the only entity out in the world doing this kind of thing, but it's like ultimately, yes, can we just get on with it and like start doing it this way? That kind of brings me to this year. I don't know if you've seen, but all of the festivals have just been announced in the last like 48 hours. So it begs the questions there too of like safety. And we're looking at, just look at airlines right now, like what Southwest just went through, and airlines and stuff. I don't want this to turn into like an economic podcast because I'm not an economist, but ultimately the pure volume of these folks who are going to be all these festivals that we did not see this volume last year, the 2 years prior. Like, I fucking hope everything goes smoothly, man. It's scary out there for people. It's like, that's why I tend to not really go to festivals. Everyone's got their own preference. I think there's something really cool about being able to go to one place for 1 day or 2 days and seeing like everyone you wanted to see all year. But ultimately, like, that's great for a lot of people who might have to work every fucking day of the year. And this is their one chance to blow off steam.
Yes.
And I understand completely why those exist. But yeah, such like a nitpicky dork like me, like, no, I need to get in there. Like, this person just put out this record. No. I'm going to see that. I'm going to be on that touring cycle for that album because I know the band that they put together, and I know, like, it's just everyone's got their own version of how they want to experience live music and things like that. And I think that is why there are all these different agencies, all these different artists and venues and labels and ticketing companies. It's just, with 8 billion people, I think we've just kind of landed here, you know,
Yes. Yes.
too many choices.
So many choices, which, like, in some ways we're spoiled, right? Like, I think
Oh yeah.
the piece that I hope starts to evolve is a return of agency to individuals and to artists. And, like, again, not to turn this into an economic podcast, but Gary Vee, who I like 50% of the time, I'm like, I'm really glad you're here. And 50% of the time, I'm like, I wish you would shut the fuck up. As like, I find it very love-hate with him. But he was saying something, which is that, like, if you look at sort of like the influencer economy, the number of people who are making, like, 10 million, 50 million, 100 million is wildly small. The number of people making 100K, which by most accounts, unless you literally live in New York City or a couple of other places, is a really wonderful amount of money to make, is getting bigger and bigger. And it's because, like, if I can say, I solve refrigerator organization for busy moms in the Midwest, that may not even be specific enough, right? But, like, you can really fucking niche down and be like, I do this thing for this group in this place, and that's it. And if you fall into that box, you're like, well, I'm going to you, because I'm not going to, like, National Refrigerator Organization Services. It's going to fucking take me 2 months to get my fridge organized.
Yeah.
And so
and I'll never hear from a human.
And it'll be completely impersonal, suck. So, like, with artists, we're definitely not getting into, like, the streaming conversation about how much people get paid. We're not getting into it. But I do sincerely hope, and I think to an extent it is on us as artists to acknowledge, like, we do not have to accept the terms we are often offered with how we need to build a career. And every time I see someone on Twitter say, like, the only way to make it as an artist is to make reels, it's like, you are part robot, friend. Like, you have just accepted that we have no control. We have no power. We have, like, go play music outside right now and tell me you don't get people to stop. Tell me you can't get people to sign up for an email list. Tell me you can't get someone to buy a concert ticket or a t-shirt. You fucking can. Is it easy? Is it automated? Is it on your phone? No. Is it possible? Yeah. Yes. So, like, there has to be some ownership of, like, we have to divorce ourselves from the path we have seen. A few people, ultimately, it's really not a big number, rise to stratospheric fame, when the reality is, like, there's a gulf in the middle of people dying on this hill trying to make it as content creators / artists / music video producers / marketers, like, fucking / it's just, it's not going to work for so many people. And what I ultimately want is for them to not quit. I just don't want people to give up on what they really want to do.
I feel you on that, and I think there must at some point be some reckoning on, more of the general populace deciding, like, okay, I would love to just play music, perform it every day, all day, and do the thing, but, like, if the demand isn't there for people wanting to absorb said music and listen to it or whatever, then, like, I don't know. Isn't there, like, a balance that can be struck where it's like, don't, like, scratch your eyes out trying to make it in the industry if it's not happening after just, like, enough time and hard work. And it's like, maybe not to, like, kill anyone's dreams, right? But, like, I would love to think about the word balance a lot more this year. And I'm sure, millions of people are saying the same thing, at least millions. So yeah, I mean, maybe there is some new form of balance where, like, you can make income doing other things, but also have enough bandwidth and time to, like, also make music and create it, perform it. And maybe I don't know, in other countries you can get, government subsidies to do this kind of shit. And so, like, I think ultimately it all is going to, like, the cream will rise to the top, whether it's, like, the most, talented people or the songs or music that, like, hit the most people, whatever it is. I think ultimately that stuff will always happen. I mean, gosh, it just will. So yeah, I think ultimately we're at this time. I really can only speak for America because I've only lived here, but there's this time where like it's just the age of privilege for so many humans, in this country are just like completely fucked. To put it just succinctly, so we don't have to, try to wax philosophically back, because it's just the truth. And so there are so many where like, oh, we get to, myself included, worry about bigger picture things. We get to like be existential, and like for a lot of people, they don't fucking have the chance to be existential. So like also think about, people can think about in that way too, as this TikTok machine churns on and music changes forever, because ultimately the song remains the same, right? So yeah, I think what's probably going to be, a trend we start seeing is like maybe people realizing they don't need to be a TikTok star. They don't need to be touring the country, recording an album every 2 or 3 years, or doing, it's like maybe you find some other deep value in your life where you can feel like you're on stage, not performative wise, but just like this is your role that you want to, this function that you want to like be able to, provide for other people every day. Maybe it's like building a new dwelling for someone, or like there might be hopefully like a balance in the coming decades or years where I think like music can kind of come back to be a little more reverent. I think ultimately, and not religious specifically, it's just like ultimately more just reverent, more spiritual. It doesn't have to be this like completely commodified fucking churned out object, because it is now, for a lot of people. I think I kind of tend to dwell in not like the deep underground where like only 7 people have heard this thing. If that's the case, it's because it's me or my buddy who like sent a thing to each other. But like ultimately, I kind of automatically dwell in that area of like the not hyper popular. But I love me some Taylor Swift songs and shit. It's like no problem. But yeah, I think ultimately, I feel very grateful and privileged and lucky in the sense that I do have this kind of strange weirdo community of musicians and artists who like a lot of them have jobs meaning like work in the economy of America on some level, whether they're teachers or business, like lawyers for a business, or can literally manual labor, construction work, like any of that. But then also like fucking play some killer music and like get to perform it once a month, or whatever that may be. So I think ultimately I'm not coming up with this idea. This is like things that I've seen and heard many times in the past decade or so. But like ultimately I think that's the dream. That would be the dream that I would have, is that we'd still be able to like go see the stuff that's very popular on certain levels and it's just always going to be that, but then also that like give people the break they deserve. I'm like, you don't have to make it, you don't have to do a fucking TikTok reel. Yes, music might be your calling and it might be the only thing that brings you joy, but you have to have some other value as a human that you can either monetize or share with your people around you.
Yes,
that's kind of
I
end rant.
And TED Talk. No, I so agree with you, and I think it's like I'm not saying anything new by saying this, but it's for me it feels like a desire for people to value and celebrate their entirety, right? Like I've never met a person who makes music where that is the only thing they do, right? Like a creative soul has many outlets, and maybe guitar or singing or whatever the permutation of music is a huge channel for you, but it's not all of you. It's not the entirety of you. And so like celebrating the whole human. And again, I say that as both we as an audience celebrating an artist, but also an artist being able to celebrate their entirety, right? Not seeing themselves as like, my only value is if I have a guitar in my hands, or my only value is if I'm singing. It's like, no, motherfucker, like you're an incredibly valuable person. You're alive. You're here. You're doing it. Like that's enough. That's more than enough. And I hope you invest in all of you, all of your parts, all of your health.
Love it. All of your parts.
Right? All of your parts. Super quick, because I think we're going to wrap up soon, but I want to give you an opportunity because I'm not super familiar. What is Dice? What do you do? Where are you going? Like it seems relevant to people who like to see shows and want to be in shows. So like, let me know.
That's fair. This is actually great practice for me. I mean, I do this for a living. kind of discussing what Dice does and getting new partners on board into what I call like the Dice ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
It's essentially it's a ticketing platform at heart, and we allow for fans to discover experiences, mostly shows or concerts that maybe they wouldn't otherwise. And so I think again, this is kind of just going back to what we spoke about so many times in our conversation today. But ultimately, there's just so much out there. There's just such a blind spray of stuff. And I think essentially, what Dice is doing is kind of like dialing that in and giving people one place to check for shows or experiences or concerts or nightclub experiences or, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I would say it's a platform that's assisting fans, venues, promoters, festivals, artists, and, supporting that as a living, breathing, organism.
Yeah.
And it's kind of what Dice is all about.
It's awesome.
Getting people out more. That's our tagline. So yeah, I think I'm here for it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Very, very cool. Chris, thank you so much for spending your time with me and sharing your stories. It was a joy to connect to you. And I think I certainly believe there will be a lot of changes and evolutions in live music in the next, certainly months, but also years and decades. And so I'm hopeful we can sit down again in a couple of years when we are even older and continue to discuss how live music is evolving. But in the meantime, thank you again. And this was a joy. I appreciate you.
Yeah. Appreciate your time. Appreciate you. And yeah, hopefully next time we speak, our kids will be making some music.
All right. Or they can have a play date in Manhattan. It'll be great. All right, brother. Be well.
All right. Take care.
Thank you so much for joining us today on Stage Dive, and I hope that you enjoyed it. New episodes drop each and every Wednesday. You can find highlights and clips of these conversations on TikTok and Instagram using the handle @Stage Dive Podcast. If you have any questions for us, want to be featured on the show, or have anything else to send, you can always email us at stagedivepodcast@gmail.com. This is Jack Dawkins, and no matter how you're performing in the world today, I want you to know that you are loved. Take care.